What's up, guys? Welcome back to Faith Family Homestead. If you're new here, my name is Dominique, but you can call me Dom. We are outside in the garden. It is a cool day. It actually feels like fall today, and all of these beds that you see covered, we're actually going to be cover cropping them. I showed you guys last time we were in the garden that there are 8 beds that have either black plastic over them or they're just covered, and the reason why I did that is because I wasn't sure if the cover crops that I did in a few of these beds was going to work because I've never done cover cropping before. But as you can see, those beds look very full and lush. It took no time at all for the cover crops to sprout up, and no weeds have been able to grow because the cover crops are so thick. So I went out and bought me some more cover crops. The cover crops that I'm using this year is winter peas. The guy at my farm store said that winter peas would be hardy, so they will not die during a frost for our growing season. And so yeah, we haven't technically had a frost, so I didn't know, but that's what the guy at my farm store recommended. So all of the beds that I have plastic over, and then even this bed where I took the plastic off already, I did not have any cover crops at the time. I just sprinkled some like radish seeds I had and just some extra seeds that were like old that I had, like broccoli. I think it was like old broccoli seeds, old cabbage seeds, stuff like that, and I sprinkled it down onto the ground, but it wasn't enough. Like, as you can see, there's still plenty of spots where there's not sprouts. Like, there's a whole bunch of sprouts there, but then bare here. And so I'm just going to be using, I got field peas or winter peas as well as radishes this time. Last time I did this, I only did the winter peas and then I had my own radish seeds. But this time I have no more radish seeds, so I just got a pound of radish, and this is 10 pounds of winter peas. And I'm just going to, my drip just came on, so perfect timing. I'm just going to reach in here and sprinkle them over the bed, and then the beds that are covered, I'm going to uncover them and sprinkle some seeds on them as well. And I did this exact same method last time. I just sprinkled it right on top. I did not bury it or anything, and it worked out great. This is one bed that I really look forward to getting some cover crop on top of it, because I always struggle with the soil drying out on this bed. Since the drip's on, I'm going to go ahead and get this soil wet. And you can see that some of the radishes I sprinkled down already begun to sprout, but for the most part, the soil is just always stays dry, even when I have the drip on it. So at the moment, what we're doing is just taking all of the plastic off of the old raised beds. So this one was covered, but you can tell where that edge wasn't covered because there's weeds growing and they're green, whereas in the middle, the weeds are trying to grow but they're white. This bed back here, I did not plant in it at all this season, but when we had the hurricane, the wind blew off this the landscape fabric that was here, and so when we tried to put it back, that's why you see there's some sprouts trying to grow. But hopefully once we get the cover crops, that will take care of all of this. What I figured we were gonna do is put down all of the seeds for the cover crops on all of the empty beds, and then go back through and pick out any white weeds we see. So I've taken off of this bed, I've taken off of that bed. We still need to do this bed. Now, can you take the plastic off of, or the fabric off of this bed? Yes. Yeah, they're fine. I've taken off of this bed. This is another bed that I didn't plant in at all this season because it used to be a asparagus bed, and I tried to dig up all of my asparagus, because both of those beds were asparagus, and transplant them, but then I realized that I missed some because there's still some asparagus growing in here. And so I just had it covered this past growing season. So you can see there's still some asparagus trying to grow, as well as some weeds. I'm going to uncover it and then plant cover crops in it, because what I did with this one was my husband cut it all down. We removed the weeds, and then I did plant cover crop seeds in the bottom to keep weeds from growing, because that was a big deal where this past year I could not keep weeds out of my asparagus. Yes? You can just throw it somewhere. You can throw it right there. Over there in the ground. So you can see that. You can see where the peas are growing. That's white right there because this black plastic was covering it. That's asparagus seeds. But you can see that there's asparagus growing in through here. There are some gaps, and so I'm going to put some more seeds because I want the ground to be covered so that weeds like that don't grow in here. This bed, as well as that bed, has been covered since about, I think April or May is when I harvested all my potatoes. That was a potato bed, as well as this one. So I'm just going to uncover it because I'll plant my potatoes probably in February and just sprinkle again the cover crop down in here. I actually had sweet potatoes planted in this bed. As you can see, all of that is sweet potatoes. But when I came to harvest all of this, it was like a lot of weeds, and I couldn't tell the sweet potatoes from the not sweet potatoes, and so I just ended up covering it. So the sweet potatoes are actually begun to sprout. I can't harvest any of them. Most of them look soft. So what I'm just doing is removing the tarp from this, and then I'm going to plant the winter peas / radishes around, and because the sweet potatoes will end up dying when our frost comes, and I'm just going to leave them in the ground, and maybe they can survive. The tubers can survive and then resprout next spring, and if not, if they die, it's just going to add nutrients back to the soil for next year. And that's the whole point of me winter cropping with the radishes and the winter peas, is because it sprouts fast, and then it doesn't take me where like rye and videos that I've watched with rye and stuff like that, you have to like crimp it or make sure that it's completely dead before you plant in it. Where peas, I can actually just work around it and chop and drop it, and that will kill it itself by leaving the roots, because the roots is what has the nitrogen fixation. And so I'm trying to add nitrogen in an organic way to all of my beds, so that I don't have to use as many organic fertilizers come springtime. Seeing the bed, the reason why I'm moving this fabric off of this bed is because this bed was breaking, and so weeds were growing out of the side. I still want to keep it 3 feet, but while we're waiting, I'm going to remove the plastic, plant some cover crops in it in place of these weeds, especially to nourish my trees that are in here. And because I need to redo these beds anyway, so I'm gonna move the plastic, plant cover crops, and then reconfigure this. What'd you say?
Are we gonna put this bed with lots of seeds?
We already have the bed with the seeds. It already has some on it. I bought 10 pounds of the winter peas and then 1 pound of the radishes, and I think that was the perfect amount because I'm on the last little bit, and I'm gonna sprinkle it on this bed. I think it was 9 beds that I used this on, and I did try to do a generous amount to like overseed, and so I think 11 pounds for these 9 beds. I don't remember. I know I had 10 pounds the first time. I don't remember how many beds I did with 10 pounds. And actually I probably did more than the 9 beds because I didn't count that raspberry bed, and I actually ended up sprinkling seeds there. I ended up sprinkling some more seeds in the asparagus bed. What else? So yeah, I think I actually ended up sprinkling seeds in more than the places that I originally thought, which worked out perfectly. I just counted. We ended up doing 11 beds. So right now what the girls are doing is just picking the weeds out of the beds to give these cover crops a great chance at sprouting and growing. Radishes usually sprout really, really fast. Like I said, the drip is on right now. I think we have a couple days coming up where it's going to be raining, so perfect. And hopefully we can get all of these empty beds looking as lush as this one, as well as all of the ones over there. This is really exciting. Like I said, this is my first year growing cover crops, and if it works like I'm thinking it's gonna work, I've done a lot of research on cover crops and choosing mines wisely, because I wanted crops that when it was time for spring to come and for me to plant, or even early like in February, like if I wanted to plant my potatoes, because I'm going to replant potatoes inside this bed, I wanted a crop where I could just move over and like dig a hole and then plant my potatoes or whatever crop it is. And I heard that so there's different kind of crops, cover crops. There's crops that you might want to add nitrogen to your soil or just cover the soil, or if you wanted suppress weeds, I would have planted something like a rye, is from what I was understanding. But with the rye though, you have to also make sure that it's completely dead, because it is a grain crop, and then it would if you don't kill it completely, it can still be alive, and it's hard to know the exact time. And since this was my first time doing cover crops, I wanted something that was fairly easy. And so right now it's keeping the weeds from growing because it's covered soil. But then come springtime, when I do want to kill the winter peas / radishes, it will be fairly easy for me to just chop and drop. And then I may end up having to put like straw down or something like that when I plant my tomatoes, because I want to see if this coming year I could possibly garden without the use of landscape fabric. We shall see. I might change my mind when spring comes, because I had to pull up all my landscape fabric, since all of these beds used to be 3 feet, and that's what the landscape fabric was. But now that I changed them to 4 feet, I would need to invest in 4 feet landscape fabric. So I think I'm going to just try like what I tried here in these 2 beds, which is just covering them with straw. This bed hasn't grown much weeds, but this bed, there's some aggressive weeds in it that are still growing through the mulch, and I was thinking it was because it's a thin layer. And so I went ahead and bought another bale of straw, and I'm going to split it between these 2 beds. And so that's what I'm going to do with these 2 beds. And so I have like 2 ways of keeping the soil covered this fall / winter. So the weed that I was talking about is this. It's like it goes really deep, and it has really long roots. But I'm going to try to suppress it by just putting straw. There is straw and brown paper. You can see this one's growing where the brown paper is split. But I'm wondering if I can do a really thick layer of the straw, if that can contain it. Since cover cropping is just a simple way of covering your soil, I went ahead and just used old packet of like mustard seeds and spinaches and Swiss charge and all of that, and that's what I planted in ground right here. Because once I realized that cover cropping is just all about covering your soil, and it really clicked to me when hearing that nature likes to be modest, nature likes to keep itself covered, or soil likes to keep itself covered, and all of those type sayings. I realized that I can still plant things that are not necessarily considered cover crop, as long as it's covering the soil. So I could like technically harvest stuff like that, like the mustards and stuff, but I had no intention of harvesting it because that bed gets really weedy. That's where I plant my garlic. I haven't planted my garlic yet, but I do have garlic sprouting there from last season that was really small, and so I just put it back inside the ground. And so I have garlic sprouting back up there, and then I also have garlic from inside my house that I also need to plant, but this year I'm going to actually try and plant garlic in different locations than I normally do. And I normally just have been, the past 3 years that I've been here, have planted it in that in-ground bed, where this year I'm going to try and put like a little bit of garlic in each bed to kind of confuse pests and see if I could get some polyculture going on, instead of just planting all my garlic inside this middle bed, this middle in-ground bed, especially because for the past seasons that I've been here, I've planted tomatoes in this in-ground bed. And so it would be like garlic, tomatoes, basils, stuff like that. But I realized that I do not like having tomatoes in this middle bed, because by the time June, like even May, the end of May comes, June, July especially, the tomatoes just get so big and they start falling over into this pathway, and then I feel like stuff is crawling on me and it just gets too, I don't like it, too crowded. And so this year I'm gonna actually plant some maybe dwarf flowers, maybe dwarf sunflowers or dwarf zinnias, something that doesn't get super big, something that won't get super like wild and crazy. And so that is why I'm taking down these poles, and I've already taken down the trellis here. I'm actually redesigning the whole garden layout, which is why all of my trellises is down, and we'll have to get the T-post out of these beds, because I am going to, like these beds, the hoops were going this way and I didn't like that, so I'm gonna actually make the hoops go from one bed to the other bed, and so that way it might look better from the front of the garden when I'm looking in, and as I'm going down it can be like shaded, and like so it would shade the in-ground bed one, and then also it can feel like a magical garden when I'm walking through. That's at least my hope in changing the layout. The last thing I have to do is get that bale of straw that my girls are getting, because like I said, I'm going to put a thicker layer of straw here, and this is where I have my, obviously you see marigolds and zinnias, but then I also have my celery here, but just on the outsides I'm putting more straw because there were just a couple weeds sprouting, and so I want to keep it completely covered. And since there's already straw here and in that bed, I didn't think that it would be a good idea to move it to plant cover crops, so I'm just going to keep the soil covered. And that's basically the goal of planting cover crops, is for me to keep the soil covered without the use of like plastics and the landscape fabric, so that way I'm like adding nutrients to my soil, because the plastic works great, the landscape fabric worked great, but I'm not adding nutrients to my soil. So this way, by adding the cover crops, I'm covering my soil, but then I'm also adding nutrients to my soil. And like I said, after these all sprout, which I'm really, really excited now that I see what cover cropping can do, especially with the radishes and the winter peas and how thick and lush that side looks. I'm really excited to have mostly all of the garden look as thick and lush. Thank you guys for hanging out with me as we cover crop the remaining 11 or ish beds in the garden. As I say the last bed, you're making me fall. As I say the last beds, I was thinking, I never cover crop this pepper bed, and that's because it's still producing, and my frost hasn't come yet. I did sprinkle some peas around the outsides, but for the most part that bed is still a pepper bed. So that bed, as well as my two spicy beds, actually not my two spicy beds, my two spicy beds are going to be a onion bed, and so I'm not going to cover crop those when the time comes. But my sweet pepper bed, I'm going to have it be a sweet pepper bed again next year, so I may, when the frost comes, pull the landscape fabric up and then plant some more peas, because right now I have peas growing around the outsides. For the most part, there's a weed right here, but for the most part I tried to sprinkle peas around the outskirts, but the whole inside, once we harvest all of these peppers and the frost come, is going to be bare, and so I might as well go ahead and cover crop them and let them look as good as these beds do.